Is Dehancer the answer to our digital dreams of becoming analog reality? I don't know. Let's find out. Hello, Tim with Mars Go Home, and I know this is weird. Let's not make a big deal out of it. So before we get started on this little journey, I think that it's important to have a little disclosure. A few weeks ago, the gentleman over at Dehancer reached across the pond and asked the fine gentleman standing before you, me, to review their plugin and maybe do a little tutorial to boot. But it's also important to note that they wanted an honest review, and all these little tiny nuggets of gold that are my opinions are just that. They're opinions. So remember, kids, opinions are like assholes. Everyone's got one, most of them stink. Also, keep in mind I'm not a colorist. I consider myself a jackass of all trades and a bastard of one. And even though I do have some understanding of color science, I am not a biologist by any means. So with all that out of the way, what is Dehancer? Well, Dehancer is a film emulation plugin for all the big boy editing platforms for like Resolve, Final Cut Pro, Adobe Premiere, and even After Effects. But it's not limited to just video applications, but for photographers also, for like Lightroom and Photoshop and whatnot. And since I spend most of my time inside After Effects and Premiere, that's where we will be focusing on today. I've had about a month or so to play around with the plugin inside of Premiere and in After Effects, and my initial thoughts were, wow, this can be overwhelming really quick. But then after a bit, I was having some fun. I put it on everything. And I even slapped it on this. So dumb. So let's jump into Premiere and see what Dehancer is all about. So before we begin, let's set up our sequence settings. Now, Dehancer recommends that we use working space of 709 and that we have the maximum bit depth and the maximum render quality checkboxes checked. And we are good here. And that's pretty much all we need to do here. So let's hit OK. Now, these are just some basic tests here to kind of get an overview of what the plugin kind of does. If you're new to color correction and to color grading, I do highly suggest practicing on gradients. It just gives a good idea of what levels do, what curves do, what black levels do, what white levels do, what exposure does, and it just gives you a good understanding and a good idea of what all these little tools do. And not just Dehancer, but in other color tools also. So I just have a gradient here, just a ramp, and then just a 4 color gradient on this clip here. I already have Dehancer Pro on an adjustment layer, so let's just enable it. This is straight out of the box, and we can immediately see what's happening here. And if I just zoom in, it shifts the whites and the darks and immediately adds film grain to it. So one of the first things I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna turn off film grain because it's automatically on. And we can see what our Lumetri scope is doing here with the reds and the blues and the greens. It's just separating. If we turn this off, it's a straight line. Turn it back on. We can kind of see it's crushing the blue and the green, it looks like. Lifts a little bit of the red in the low ends and drops it off. So that's immediately. So let's go ahead and I am going to just turn off the print. I'm just going to run through kind of what all these mean and my understanding of them. So if we toggle down the input, here's where we can select the color space of our camera or what we need to convert it to. And right now we're just going to keep it on Rec 709, but we have a plethora of camera profiles in here. If you go to their website and click on the film and profiles, and they give you the full list of what film profiles they have, what print media they have, and the camera log profile, so you can see if your camera is in here. It's also important to note that these camera profiles are not coming from the manufacturer of the camera themselves. These are developed in-house by the Dehancer white coat madmen scientists over there, just to work with Dehancer better. So just keep that in mind. If you want to bypass this, just keep it at Rec 709 and on a separate layer, throw on your actual color space transform. So I won't go too deep in all this stuff. Dehancer has a great documentation on their website. So if you want to do a deeper dive into it, I highly suggest you do that. This is your input. This is for your camera. Now, if we come down to the next one, this is film. And this is what the film negative is loaded into the camera. This is what that film uses. For instance, I think Blade Runner was shot on Eastman Kodak 5247, I believe. I think 7 with Darius Kanji, he shot on the Eastman EXR 5287 or something like that. And Christopher Nolan likes to use the Kodak Vision 3, so we're in luck here. So we can make our own Inception. Also, they have, and it's kind of going off the screen here, but they do have Ektachrome, which Kodak actually brought back specifically for Euphoria, and so they brought that film stock back. So let's keep it at Vision 3 here. And also, while we're here, I highly recommend when you first put on Dehancer to come down here to check profiles, and it will basically scan and download any new profiles or updated profiles right there into Dehancer. So good. Let's go down to Film Developer. Film Developer is, let's enable it. It's kind of weird. You got to remember to enable some of these, and they're at the bottom of the toggle switches here. So let's make sure we enable it. Film Developer. This is where you adjust the film during developing inside the lab. They would do like post flashing and silver retention processing and all that fun stuff. So this is where they would give it a little bit more contrast or less contrast. They'll boost the gamma just a little bit where they need to. Especially if you're pushing the contrast, and then you can use the gamma. If you don't do anything to the contrast, it won't do anything, because it's not seeing what it's fixing. So if you drop the contrast down, then you can start playing with the gamma curve and the correction. Color separation. Let's bring this here. Let's come over to the color, and you can kind of see what's kind of doing here with the curves here. So that's all that this pretty much does. So you can do some fine finessing here. And of course you have your color boost. And this is kind of gives it a little bit more saturation or desaturation. Moving on, let's go to film compression. Film compression is kind of a new concept for me, to be honest. So what I did is I deep dived into the Dehancer blog, and I did a nice little read on it. So basically, from what I understand, it kind of affects the highlights of the film. However, I would use it sparingly because you can really blow out and compress the bright areas a lot more. So it kind of drops it, and depends on your shot and how you filmed it. It may kind of make it a little crunchy. And you can see here what it's kind of doing to some of the colors. And let's bring it over here. That's with it enabled. With this on, we can kind of see what it's doing. It's kind of lowering this area in the scope. All right, let's come down to expand. This area just kind of controls the black and the white levels and the retention of the output color space. And by that, let's enable it. We can see here at the bottom of the scope, it just basically raises the black point to cover more area. And if we look at the white point and we bring this up, it pushes those white values up, and there we go. Let's come down to print. This is where you'd print the film negative onto another piece of film for screening or editing, or the type of paper that you'd use for photography. For instance, I do believe Fight Club was actually printed onto the Kodak 2383. So now we can make our own Fightception. Inception Club. Fightceps. We can target the whites, see what it does. You can raise the exposure of the actual print film or lower it. Tonal contrast, and you can see what it does. It really bends the bottom of this curve here. color density, let's move over here to the, and then you can kind of see what's happening to the color. And saturation is more color, no color. Let's move over to the Colorhead. This is a larger paintbrush for creative purposes, and a lot of time mainly focused on photography and enlarging, but we can use it in film also. And this is more, like I said, creative. So this is where we would enable it. This is where more blue or more yellow, more green, more magenta, red, or more cyan and more red. Film grain. This is pretty self-explanatory. However, what I do like about Dehancer's film grain is that it seems to sit a lot better into the footage versus other methods such as overlaying it onto footage. The grain itself interacts with the pixels and the footage itself. Now, in all honesty, to the naked eye and to the untrained eye, no one will notice, but as a fellow nerd, I respect this. So let's turn this on, and you can see exactly what it's doing. It just kind of spreads out and has a nice little fall off in the grain. They have different presets here, 8mm, and the bigger the ISO, the more grain, the bigger the film. I do like this. Halation, well, I did a whole video kind of doing a deep dive into that, so I won't spend too much time on this, but basically it just puts the red and orange halo around the bright parts of the frame. And probably won't see much here. However, this is interesting here, is technically nothing is clipping. And that's kind of where the halo of the halation will come through, is the clipping of the whites, where it kind of exceeds the value of, say, 255 here. It would start putting a little bit of red halo around it. I noticed with Dehancer, it kind of puts a red tint over the entire frame itself. And if we can look here and re-enable it, you can see how it kind of lifts up the red and lowers the blues just a little bit, and just adds a little bit of red tint over the whole frame. It blends everything together a little bit nicer, so that's nice. We have I think the no remjet is pretty much the same thing as the anti-halation layer on film, or the lack of the anti-halation layer. So where it says no remjet, it's going to be stronger and a lot more prominent. And of course, you can come into custom and you can customize the halation look yourself. So my only criticism on this, and it's more just of a creative thing, is that this halation doesn't give you an option for other colors. It's just one color or a variation of that color. Now, I understand that halation is one color for a specific reason, but for creative purposes, for a little bit of leeway, a little jumping off into the wilderness of exploration, it doesn't really give you that option. Now, I understand this is Dehancer, and they're by the books, and there's no funny games being played here. This is serious stuff. Let's come down to bloom. Bloom is just adds a little bit of light dispersion from the brightest contrasting parts of the image. This is different than halation. It's more of it's bloom, whereas halation's a lot tighter and one color, whereas blooms out just the lightest parts of the frame, something or other. Film damage, this just adds hair, scratches, some dust, as somebody was shaving next to the developing of the film. So we can click that on and we can see exactly. Go to 8mm. You can start seeing scratches and hairs. Obviously, the bigger the film, the less it's going to be in there, more subtle aspects of it. And again, you can come into custom and you can fully customize how much hair, how much dust, how much scratches you would like into the film. Now, Filmbreath. This emulates the temperature and exposure over the entire film, whether it's due to poor developing or a cheap grade film. So let's click this on. For the more extreme versions, I will put it on 8mm so it can really see what's happening to this graph. And you'll see it breathe, hence Filmbreath, as we start playing it. You start seeing the temperature and the exposure just kind of shifting back and forth, breathing. And 8mm is going to be the lot more extreme version of it. I'd be very careful when using this because it can generate some flashing and invoke some seizures if you're not careful. So use it sparingly and subtly. Gate weave, we're probably not going to really see what's happening on this footage, but gate weave is, it simulates the film swaying back and forth or wiggling inside the camera or the projector and up and down and side by side, that kind of fun stuff. Overscan, again, this is mainly used for photographers when they scan film into the scanner on a printer for digital replication. You often get the perforated edges on the side, and you can customize them with however you would like. And essentially they're just overlays. They're neat, might be a little bit on the gimmicky side for me, and I don't know if I would use it that much, but I'm sure there's use cases for it. Vignetting, again, this is pretty self-explanatory. You can use a spot control your viewers a focus or give an overall lens flaw to it. So we're going to enable this, kind of see what it does here. We can do an exposure, lift, or drop on it. Monitor, I do like this a lot. This brings in the false color aspects, and you can see, turn this vignette off, there we go. On a gradient like this, we have from darkest to brightest part, and you can tell from footage what may be overexposed or underexposed. And if you're familiar with using cameras at all and exposing using false color, which I've recently kind of fallen more in love with, to be honest, and clipping kind of does what I was just explaining, was what is kind of dropping a little bit too close to the bottom level here, 0 for the underexposed, and the overexposed, what's kind of clipping above the 255. So it's a great way to monitor your footage. LUT Generator, I'll go into that later. That's pretty cool. One of my favorite parts of this whole thing. So let's go ahead and jump into some footage real quick and just kind of see what we got here. This is for my my upcoming hip-hop album.
Now that's a panorama, predator but the cipher hot words like magma, crushing every beat, calling a T-Rex enigma. Roar like thunder, footsteps shake the ground. 709, rep it loud with the baddest sound. Top of the food chain, his reign profound. In the gangster's kingdom, he's the one crown.
Oh, that was a long way for a pun. I hate it so much. It's enable Dehancer. Now, again, the first thing I'd like to do here is film grain and disable it. Let's come over to input, and again, like I said, this is Blackmagic Raw, and I will use Dehancers. I apologize, it's going off the screen here. So let's do this is the 4K, Blackmagic 4K. So we can lift the exposure or drop it if we'd like, but we can come back to this. So I'm not going to touch a lot of this right now. So let's come down to film and let's keep it on. Let's do daylight, Vision 3 daylight. And right after that, let's come down to our print media and bring this down to like the Kodak 2383. And then we can start messing around with some of this stuff. For the expand, bring up the black levels just a little bit so we can kind of drop them a little bit lower, not too much. We can come back here and we can lift the white points just a little bit right before it starts clipping. There we go. Again, we can go to Luma and just looking at that, that looks really nice. Let's come over to Film Developer and let's boost up the color quite a bit here. So we can start bringing a lot of color into here. And we can also mess with the contrast just a little bit. Kind of spreads the middle out a little bit on this one. I like this. This might be a good area to show where the compression is happening. Let's look around this tree here and enable it. You can kind of see exactly what it's doing. It's dropping the highlights up to about 2/3. Yeah, you can see it just takes the overall top side and just brings it down a little bit altogether. We can mess with it from here, how much we want in there. So we can keep it on for now. We can always turn it off. Let's come over to the print. We need to start being careful that we don't crush it too much in the dark areas. And the color density really starts separating here in the sky. So let's bring that up just a little bit. Saturation, analog range limiter. I do like this. Just kind of softens everything a little bit, in my opinion. Colorhead, again, like I said, this is where we can start getting creative with some of our big swaths of color. And we can start adjusting. Let's say we want to bring in a little bit more of a blue hue to this image. Maybe we want to bring in a little bit of those greens. And maybe we want to drop some of the reds. Bring up the reds a little bit. Now, something I like to do with the shadows and tones and midtones and highlights is, say, we bring up the shadow tones just a little bit here. Say right here. So if I bring the shadows tones down, bring the midtones up, and the highlights down just a little bit, gives a little bit more separation within the image itself. So that's good. Also keep in mind, just because the options are in here doesn't mean you have to use them all. Let's turn on the film grain. As soon as we enable the film grain, it just kind of blends everything together. Maybe kind of difficult to see with the YouTube compression. Let's do fit. But it just kind of really integrates itself with the color a lot better than, say, an overlay. And I do like that. So let's bring this down and let's just drop this to 65 millimeter. Just for now, so it's there. And it takes the bite off that digital look also, so I do enjoy that. Halation, I don't know if anything's gonna really show up here, but we can look. There we go. 8 millimeters is a lot more sensitive to that. 65 here, no remjet. It just kind of adds a little bit of the red overall look to it, so we'll keep it there. Bloom, again, let's come over to bloom and let's drop this down to 8 millimeter, or probably not going to see much here. This might be a good time to go into the impact. Let's bring this up, let's bring the diffusion up and amplify, and we can click it on and off and see what it's kind of doing. Now this is extreme, but for purposes of this we'll be okay. But I will probably just drop this down. Just adds a little bit of bloom, and for the most part I think this image is done. So let's jump over into After Effects and kind of give an idea of why you would use it inside After Effects. So one of the reasons why I would use Dehancer in After Effects is to see how everything just kind of blends together. It's making sure all the colors are pretty much close to being on point, especially if, say, another colorist is working on it or another artist is working on it. We can share profiles, making sure all the scenes match. Also, I can send this off to the director or the producer so they have a good idea what the final image might look like, because we've all been there. Why does the color look off? As they breathe over your shoulder with their hot coffee breath. I've been that person. So I have this piece of footage here. If I just turn all this off, this is what it looks like. I have our basic plate with the composited render, and I've also created mattes for the blue guy here. That way, if I needed to adjust the color just on him a little bit, maybe make him more blue or bring down the blue some, or just do some secondary color adjustments to that character only that's composited, make them sit a little bit better into the footage, I can do that. Now, the original plate was shot on red, and for this, I used the red CST, or the color space transform LUT on there. So I'm gonna use this versus the Dehancer built-in one, but Dehancer does have one for the red 8K helium. I think this was shot on. So I have just a couple of things here. I have a little bit of exposure, saturation, spot isolation, and what would be considered a lift. So, and if you want, I can go through this in a separate tutorial later. So let's go ahead and add another adjustment layer, Dehancer, And let's add Dehancer onto it. Make it a habit to check the profiles every time you open it up. So here is the image right out of the box, and to be honest, I like it. I don't have to do anything to it. But we can go in here and adjust some things a little bit. Kind of see what they're all kind of giving you here. But just because you have all the options here doesn't mean you need to use them. So I can keep that on linear, maybe 250D. Let's keep that on linear. That looks the best at this particular example. I do like the interface in, like, say, Premiere a lot better than the After Effects. So that's pretty much my only gripe here with the After Effects plugin. And the other thing that kind of is a little frustrating with the After Effects plugin is, let's say we come down to Halation's a good example. When you open it up, it's not enabled. So if we enable it, it just spreads everything apart. You kind of need to come and twirl these back, closed, then we can start working with them. Again, Halation here is a good spot to show the mask of what Halation is doing. You can see that it's placing a nice red swath over it, and that's 16 millimeter. 16 millimeter, no remjet. I mean, that's just really intense. That's stupid. When it comes to Halation, I like to keep things very subtle. Let's add some bloom to it. Again, let's turn this mask mode on, and you kind of see what the bloom is doing. So that's on. So we can keep it something like that. Again, it kind of explodes all these little adjustments to looking a little too bright, and we can just drop the exposure down just a little bit. And maybe we can just mess with the mid-tone or the shadows. Gotta remember to enable it. Something like that. See what's clipping? Yeah, it's a little dark here. That was kind of in the compositing. It is what it is. Also in After Effects, the plugin kind of runs a little bit slower to render, but I have a lot of stuff going on here, so whereas Premiere is a little bit more, well, depending on your system, it can be heavy on your system if you're not careful. See how quickly we got to this spot. So here's one of my favorite things about Dehancer, and that's the LUT Generator, especially if you're in the indie film arena. Now hear me out. Ideally, you'd craft your desired look through your camera, lighting, and lens testing, environment testing. You'd bring that footage into your editing program of choice, do a color grade, and really nail down the look that you're looking for. Export the LUT, import that LUT into your on-set viewing monitor for the director, for the cinematographer, for you, whoever's on set, or your camera. That way you can light and get everything you need based on that look that you've crafted already. Don't record that LUT baked into your footage. Keep the log format. You're just using it as a monitoring LUT. Now once you're done, take that footage back into your editing program, throw that LUT on it, do your edit with pretty much the final look that you're looking for, or you can ship the LUT with the footage over to a colorist. They'll laugh at you, say you're not good at coloring, you're way outside the lines, use the wrong colors, Tim. Why'd you use the wrong colors? But they'll have a good idea of what you are looking for. But you don't have to stop there. Dehancer and the Blackmagic Mobile App. I'll go through this real quick, like just to squeeze some of that lemony creative juices into your brain hole. If you haven't already, download the Blackmagic camera app. It is free. Now set up a shot and film it for a few seconds. Here I have Pumpkinhead holding a colored card. Now download that video to your computer using Google Drive, or if you're on a Mac, you could just airdrop it to your computer. Drop that clip you just recorded into the editing platform of choice. Take some time, grade it to your liking, minus any of the post effects like halation, bloom, film damage, overscans, and whatnot. Once you get that image to how you like to see it inside the camera, come down to the LUT generator. Select the size of the LUT and then export the LUT. If you have an iPhone and you're on a Mac, just plug the phone into your machine and drag the LUT into the Blackmagic folder. However, I'm on a Windows machine, so we got to get a little creative.
Not a PC.
First, make sure you have iTunes installed because the next part will require it to be installed. Next, download 3U Tools. I'll put the link in the description. This will allow us to access all the apps and folders on our phone. Plug in your phone and open up the Blackmagic Camera app. Click Import and select your LUT. Next, open up the Blackmagic Camera app again. Click Settings and click on the color space. If you're on the iPhone Pro or the Max Pro, you'll have a selection here for Apple Log, which if you do, select that. It's a lot better than Rec 709. It's Log. If not, just keep it on Rec 709. Next, scroll all the way down to the LUT section. Click LUT Selection, then tap Import LUT. Your newly created LUT will be in the folder right there, that top folder. Select it and bounce back to the menu. Make sure you enable the Dehancer LUT, and you'll know that by the little blue check mark right there. Now, back out and make sure you toggle the display LUT to on. And you're ready to rock. And we're not even done there. Dehancer has an app to edit your photos and video. You can import some video footage into the app that you shot with your iPhone, and here you have all the same options as you do in the plugin. It's actually a lot easier to navigate in the app also. You'll get previews of film stocks. You can filter them by type and group. Pretty neat. My only gripe is that you can't rotate your phone to get the video footage to look bigger, but you can pinch and zoom in if you need it. The other thing I like about the Dehancer app is editing photos in it. It's fun. It's a good alternative to something like Lightroom, and there are so many different post-processing imaging apps out there. For me, Dehancer just seems fun to work in. And also, this is probably where, if anything, I would use the Overscan a lot more. I can see the use case being inside the app, so this is great. I can also see myself sitting on an airplane just editing photos for the entire trip, and then as soon as I get some Wi-Fi or a cell signal, I can just photo spam all my friends and family just pictures of my dog. Is Dehancer for you, and should you consult a doctor before using Dehancer? Weird, I don't know what that last part has to do with Dehancer at all, but is Dehancer for you? And I think that's a tough question to answer. And it really depends on where you are. And by that, I mean where you are in your career or what your end goals are. And it's not like you can't do a lot of this stuff with native coloring tools in your editing program of choice. They kind of did all the hard work in the back end for you. It just serves as a shortcut and could be a time saver. And trust me, time is something that we need, especially in post. Right now, a lifetime license is going to run you about 450 bones or $449 USD. So that can be considered a downside, especially if you're a novice or a hobbyist. But if you're a working professional, maybe it's a good investment. 1 or 2 good jobs and the thing pays for itself. Maybe you're making an independent film, feature film, short film, music video. Ask yourself if your budget can allow something like this in it. Like I said in the beginning, Dehancer did give me the plugin to review, but they're also giving you, beautiful and amazing people, 10% off if you use Mars Go Home in the checkout. You'll save some cheese, it'll help the channel out a little bit. So yeah, this has been my review and overview and a little bit of a tutorial. Thanks for sticking around if you made it this far. I know this one was a doozy. And until next time, young scholars, stay rad, stay cool, stay creative.
709, that's the T-Rex with the grind. Roaring through the hood, jaw snapping on time. Deep shot by the Junie, got the claws for the crime. In the jungle of the streets, kingpin in his prime. Tail wagging, money bagging, swagger like a dragon. Stomping on his foes, ain't no time for lagging. Fossilized dreams, living out the saga. Outrun the cops, now he's the Dino Godfather. 709, ain't nobody cross his line. T-Rex in the game, got the hustle in his spine. Dino boss running things with a roar so divine. In the urban jungle he fried, commits no borderline. Platinum scales, gold chains, dinosaur click. Fossil fuel power when he's shifting his stick. Primeval beast with a modern day twist. Ain't no extinction event for this lyrical blitz. Concrete savannah, king with a planner. Rolling with a crew now, that's a panorama. Predator but the cipher hot words like magma. Crushing every beat, calling a T-Rex enigma. Roar like thunder, footsteps shake the ground. 709, rep it loud with the baddest sound. Top of the food chain, his reign profound. In the gangster's kingdom, he's the one crown.